Welcome to the Tuscarawas County AntiDrug Coalition podcast, bringing you open and honest conversations about resources in Tuscarawas County. Now here's your host, Jodi Salvo.
Hi, this is Jodi Salvo. Welcome to another podcast with the Tuscarawas County AntiDrug Coalition. Today we have two members of Community Hospice, and today we're just going to be talking a little bit about how do we deal with this 2020 holidays. Man, it's getting darker outside at night. We have holidays coming up, and we're seeing increased cases of COVID, and clearly we need to heed that we need to be very conscientious and mindful about social gatherings, which really impact holidays, family get-togethers, holiday parties, and I think just a lot of loss. So I think all year we've been experiencing loss, and now it's kind of probably loss fatigue.
Yes.
And we're hitting that time where it's really kind of hard, I think, for all of us to continue to give up what seems normal and traditions and stuff like that. So who else better to reach out to Community Hospice, because you probably really understand what loss looks like, what the grieving process looks like. So I'm LeAnn. I'm going to start with you. Just introduce yourself, a little bit about what you do. We'll go to Julie. And then let's just kind of open up this conversation about how do we deal with this uncharted time that we're all in right now.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm LeAnn Mallernee. I'm one of the bereavement care counselors with Community Hospice. And so I'm a care counselor over there. We see families that come through our services for bereavement care. And we also see community clients.
Okay.
Not everybody is able to access hospice services when it comes to death and loss. And so we just want to make our services available to those folks that need it. And like you said, this is a truly uncharted territory this year. And so lots of loss beyond just the loss of a loved one. And so we just want to make sure that people know that those services are available.
Very good.
Yeah.
And Julie?
I'm Julie Yoder, and I live and work up in Stark County with Community Hospice. And I have a couple of hats there. I am a nurse, so I do go out and see patients. And I also work with bereavement. And so I have kind of a variety of clients to see and work with. And I think, LeAnn, talking about all the different kinds of losses, it's not even just, and I don't want to say just, but it's not even just the death of somebody that we love, but it's so many other losses too. And those are, for our bereaved clients, I think the COVID situation has certainly been challenging and added so much more to their losses and to their adjustment to those. So that's been, I think, the biggest challenge in our bereavement work for sure.
I'll tell you what, before we kind of get on that COVID conversation, we are really glad that y'all are here. And I think Community Hospice has such a great name in Tuscarawas County for sure. I'm sure it doesn't Stark, but we're here, housed down here. So
right.
Tell us a little bit about Community Hospice and how you operate and how you work here in Tuscarawas County or in Stark County.
I'll actually start with just telling we actually are in Stark County, Tusc County, Carrollton County, Coshocton, and Columbiana.
Okay.
I gotta get them all.
Well, we have patients in probably, 10 or 15 counties actually,
okay.
But we have offices in those counties.
Yes.
Yep.
Because we do see the outlying, sometimes we'll see outlying counties as well. And so we're stretched out, and so it's nice that we cover a large area.
Okay.
And so and the nice thing about Community Hospice is we're so well received in all of those communities. And we're so well supported, and so it's nice just to kind of work with those communities to provide those services, because there's not a lot of there's a lot of different community services, and so it's a great need, and so I think people really appreciate it because there's always been there's a lot of stigmas about hospice, or you're just kind of those negative conceptions, I guess. But so it's nice to meet people and tell them what hospice is or what it can be. And I think they appreciate that once they get that connection and get that education and get that support. Because it's overwhelming when they're taking care of loved ones. And especially right now when they're facing those decisions, do I put my loved one in a facility?
And then do I get to see them?
Yes. Yeah. And so, because that's an added stress and a lot of emotional turmoil for families right now.
Oh, I'm sure. I can't even imagine having to make that decision. Can I care for them at home, or if I have to place them in a place where then they're going to be isolated, I guess, except for you guys, and you end up being that vehicle, I'm sure, between patient and family at that point.
That's become much more of a role for us as nurses when we go out to see patients, is that contact with family and giving them our reports on their visits and, being another set of eyes for them in there. And they've expressed, frustration too, because even when they do get to go visit their loved one, they're behind a plexiglass thing, or they're 6 feet away, or they can't touch them or, hold them or comfort them. And it's so hard. And oftentimes the patient may or may not understand why, or, kind of everything that's going on. So it's just exceptionally challenging right now.
Now, have you all had staff that have contracted COVID just because of the whole process, or?
I think we have. I don't know how many or anything.
Yeah, no, I think, the hospice has done a really good job at keeping staff safe and providing the necessary equipment. So they're
safe as possible.
Absolutely. And so, they're always there checking on us and looking after us. And so, and making sure we're taking care of ourselves.
We do appreciate, I brought that up because we realize you guys are as frontline as you get.
Yeah.
And we appreciate, I'm sure I'm speaking for many people, the work you do, and to really make people feel connected and cared for and walk through this process with people. So pretty neat. Yeah. Well, neat. I appreciate that portion. Kind of want to move back to loss, COVID, and where that ties in with the AntiDrug Coalition and community agencies is I'm sure we see a lot of depression and anxiety that's coming with isolation. And then we get into self-medication and all kinds of problems and issues that can come from trying to deal with, just our current life situation. So help us understand loss a little bit, and, maybe what we can do or what we need to know to maybe navigate some of these waters better.
We're all impacted by loss. And so I think it's one of those things, I think from the very beginning when I started work here, I had a supervisor. We're not a society that's good at talking about it.
Yeah.
And we're not comfortable talking about it. And so sometimes it's one of those things that we tend to want to, we feel like we have to deal with on our own.
Okay.
And so I think that's the greatest challenge sometimes when we are going through loss or grief, is that to begin with, we feel like we're isolated.
Right.
And so now we're adding, we're even more isolation.
Yeah, now we're really isolated.
Yeah. It's complex because there's so many different things that, depending on the situation, we can be going through. And because we're not going through it daily, it's not something we always are experiencing. It can feel so foreign and so abnormal. And so just being able to navigate the different emotions and the adjustments. I think Joy had acknowledged that, all the adjustments that come from the loss of, somebody significant in your life.
Sure.
What role did they play? Especially with the holidays coming up, there's going to be, somebody missing at the table. There's going to be, traditions. People
Sure.
who made those decisions as things, so there's things that sometimes we don't think about in that context, that they're always going to be with you, and there's always going to be reminders along the way that come up. So we tend to feel like we have to get over to move on. Those are words that people tend to get, and it's not possible. So there's a lot of myths about grief that kind of put that struggle and grief for people out there, and that's where the struggle comes in.
Very good.
Well, and I think too, even identifying what the losses are, what it is that I've lost, or what is it that I'm forced to do now? Sure. I'm put into roles that I haven't been used to before. For a spouse who's lost, their husband, for example, I have to mow the yard now. Mm-hmm. I have to pay all the bills. I have to, you have to take on roles that you hadn't had before. and even feelings of loss in those areas and identifying the feelings that go with them. Sometimes I think it's hard to even figure out what it is you are feeling.
Yeah.
I have a sheet that I use with clients sometimes, and on the front it has like a grief sentence completion exercise, and on the back it has a whole list of emotions. Because when we're asked, what emotions did you have yesterday, we might say 3 or 4 of them. But when it comes down to it and you look at it, there are actually a ton more. If you can more identify what those feelings are, I think then it's maybe a little, I don't know if I want to say easier, but more effective to kind of work through those and figure out what it is you need to do to get in a place where you can cope with those. And like LeAnn said, it's not something that we get over. It's not something we get through. It's not something you can go from point A to point Z and be done. It's something that you learn to carry and cope with and figure out how to kind of move forward with them,
Right.
but also being able to live your life as well.
Very good. So what kind of, what suggestions would you give to people that might be struggling or going into this time?
Wow. Lots of
These
things.
are hard questions.
They're hard questions, but they're good questions because, I mean, I don't think people think about that,
Yeah.
you know, and Julia was talking and, you know, identifying the emotions. Absolutely. That's one of the hard things. We kind of tend to stay very surfacey. But the next thing is giving yourself permission to feel them, because we tend to want to beat ourselves up. Oh, I shouldn't feel that way. I should be grateful, or well, it's okay that maybe you feel anger or you feel guilty.
Sure.
Those are all components of grief. It's a roller coaster. It is a roller coaster. I like to use the word manage. You know, sit back and look at what can I manage right now? Even going into the holidays, what can I manage in regards to a holiday celebration? Maybe it doesn't look like it did last year or the years before. It doesn't mean that it can't go back to that next year, but this year maybe it does look different, and maybe you downsize or you change it up.
Sure.
You know? And so I think that's, to me, that's the biggest thing that I always look at is what can I manage right now? Because then we tend to want to make everybody happy and fill everybody's wants and needs, which I think is a good thing. It kind of speaks to our compassion and our heart. You know, we want everybody to have a good time, but what is it doing to us?
Sure.
And in return, and you know, if it's filling us with bitterness or frustration or stress, then it's not. Maybe it's not healthy.
Very good.
Yeah.
There's a great article by a gentleman. His name is Kenneth Doka, and he's done a lot of work in grief. And he wrote an article about the 3 C's of coping with the holidays. And I've implemented that even just in regular everyday life. And a lot of my clients, I think, have found that helpful too. And what LeAnn was talking about, you do have choices. Mm-hmm. You do have choices. That's the first one of what you will or will not do during these holidays. Am I going to send Christmas cards this year? You know what? I just don't have it in me. Am I going to?
And that's okay.
It is okay.
That's okay.
Yeah.
It is okay, and it has to be okay because that's where you are.
Yep.
Am I going to bake all the cookies that I always baked? You know what? Maybe that would be kind of fun to do that with my grandchildren or with my kids or whatever. But I just don't have the energy for it.
Yeah, I'm already kind of saying, I don't know if I need a turkey this year.
Yeah.
Well, and it makes, there are decisions to be made with COVID about whether you're going to get together or not and who you're going to get together with and what that's going to look like. And important decisions to be made. And so, the other 2 C's are communication. Mm-hmm. Other people have lost this person too. It may be a very different loss for them, but they may be grieving as well. And
so it can look very different.
Correct.
Oh, yeah.
And they may have very different expectations also. I was just talking to a client not long ago who had lost a spouse, and the kids obviously have lost a parent, but they also still have their spouses, they have their kids, they have activities of life, and while they have sustained a loss, a substantial one, it's very different for them than it is for their the spouse who's at home alone, and it's an everyday, all day kind of experience. So being able to communicate with each other, to share what your thoughts are and what you're feeling and what you feel like you need, And then the third one is compromise, because we need to compromise with each other.
Because as you're saying that, I could see one not wanting to change anything,
Correct.
and
Yeah.
one wanting to change everything, you know,
Well,
and then how do you...
And I think the biggest thing when we talk about holidays or about anniversary dates, birthdays, any of those major days that tend to bring that loss back in for us, we talk about making a plan for those days. Because when you make a plan, you have some control. And LeAnn was talking about what can we control, what can we manage, what can't we manage. So make a plan, even if it's to stay at home in your pajamas and eat ice cream all day.
Good plan.
I like that plan. Yeah.
But it may change.
Sure.
You know, a friend may call you at 2:30 in the afternoon and say, come take a walk with me. And that's okay.
In my pajamas.
Yeah.
Maybe in your
there you go.
pajamas. Sure. Why not? But, you know, to know that you have and can make choices, that you do need to communicate and then be willing to compromise with each other on, you know, how to follow through with those. And I think with any loss, with any challenge, those are good ideas to kind of keep in mind.
Sounds good.
And the earlier you start the communication, I love always talking about communication because I think that's one of the things we struggle with.
Sure.
And the earlier you can start that communication, the earlier you can start talking about that plan.
Sure.
Sometimes it even takes the sting out of those emotions on the holiday or that significant day because you're taking away that anticipation of
Sure.
of what's going to happen. And so you're kind of wrestling and adjusting to all that and putting something in place so you're getting comfortable with the way the day's going to go. So absolutely, I think communication is important.
Very good. So it's choice,
Communication.
and compromise. Okay, those are really
Yep.
3 good C's that we can think about. What else do we need to think about that we could...
I think Julie hit on something, that everybody's grief is unique. We're not going to, and we tend to, a lot of people want to compare themselves to somebody else is 3 months into their loss and they're doing fine.
Yeah.
Are they really? I mean,
Yeah.
you might not really see how they're doing, but also that's their journey.
Yeah.
Their relationship with their loved one was different than your relationship with your loved one.
Yeah.
And so your grief is going to be different.
Need.
And so try not to fall into that comparison trap.
Yep.
And we tend to also want to put a finish line on it. Like, that, how long does grief last? Well, you tell me.
It's just a year. It's a year. Everybody's over it in a
we
year.
go through the cycle and we're
No big
done,
deal.
right?
Yeah. And I think that's probably one of the, my advice to those supporting people going through grief. If you can give people time and not rush them through it, you should be through this. Those are the hardest words that people have heard when they're grieving. So if we can avoid those kinds of words or those kinds of supportive words,
Sure.
that would be great. Just give them the time they need.
So what are do's? So the do nots, don't rush people through this and kind of understand. What would be some of the do's to help
Listen.
Yes.
listen?
And know that you can't fix anything. It's not up to any of us to really fix it
Yeah.
for anybody. It's a matter of maybe helping them along the way, being there with them. Listening is probably one of the biggest things.
Staying in touch.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I
Not
think
being afraid to be around them.
Yes, I think because we fall into that, I don't know how to fix it. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So sometimes just send them a text and say, how you doing?
Yeah.
Or just say, like Julie said earlier, do you want to go for a walk? We all have our strengths in how we can
Sure.
support people. Not everybody's going to do it the same way, but sometimes we withdraw all the way and that's another loss for that person.
Yeah.
And so if you can find a way to stay in touch or just check in every so often with them, that's wonderful.
And I do think the one thing we've learned through this pandemic that isolation's probably not good for anybody in the best of situations. So
Exactly.
just being mindful, and I appreciate that. Give a text, give a call, drop a note.
Yeah.
Yes.
Something very tangible.
Yes. Any of those kinds of things that you can do to reach out in an appropriate way. Some people, I think, are better at being able then to respond, and others may not. Don't take that personally, but know that your prayers are appreciated as well. If you are people of faith, do that. I know I've seen a lot of different things. People have put together little sunshine boxes of, little things they might be able to open, or even verses or poems or sayings or things that, they throw together and they can pick one out each day, or,
nice.
There are all kinds of different little things like that, but just be creative and don't give up on them.
And probably being mindful of people that have to be more isolated right now, too, also. Huh?
Oh, absolutely. I think, I don't think we can do too much. I mean, I think we need to be mindful of that. Just how are we reaching out to people who don't have that contact? Or
I do think this whole pandemic causes people to be more intra-focused or into your own family, only because, as you're limited from access from other people, sometimes it's, I hate to say this, out of sight, out of mind, So just being mindful of people that might be isolated or, experiencing more loss this year.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that's frustrating to a lot of people who have experienced substantial loss, is that everybody else's lives very quickly go on very normally, and that's something that can create a lot of those different emotions. Yeah. But just to be thinking of, sometimes I think with this pandemic, it's given us some extra time, perhaps, that we can be thinking about, and I think we all benefit from doing something for each other.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. Very good. So I think you guys gave us some good 3 C's, and being cognizant to reach out and probably have grace and praying for each other, thinking about each other. So I really appreciate this conversation. I think it's super helpful when we think about the health of a community. We're as healthy as each other. So I want to thank you all for coming today.
Thank you for having us.
Our pleasure. And I thank you for doing these conversations and having them and
Neat. Well,
creating this platform.
Thank you all. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Tuscarawas County AntiDrug Coalition podcast. Please follow us on Facebook and visit our website at adctusk.org.